Hello friends, welcome to lesson 9, Transgender Lives and Laws, India and at International Levels. Introduction. In 1965, Dr. John F. Olivan published a medical text that included one of the first known uses of the word transgender. He wrote, "Where the compulsive urge reaches beyond female vestments and becomes an urge for gender, sex change, transvestism becomes transsexualism." The term is misleading. Actually, transgenderism is what is meant because sexuality is not a major factor in primary transvestism. He writes this in Sexual Hygiene and Pathology, published in 1965. At this point, Dr. Olivan used the word transgender as a synonym for transsexual in reference to people who transition through surgery. The objectives of this lesson: after completion of this lesson, you will be able to understand about the transgender lives. You will be able to describe Indian and international laws. So, let us begin by understanding the etymology of transgender. Activist and trans pioneer Virginia Prince, who popularized the term through her advocacy and writing in 1970s. In 1969, Prince first used the term transgenderal to distinguish herself from transsexuals or those who use surgery to transition. Her use of the term transgenderal clearly differentiated between the ways people choose to transition. In 1974, social workers, medical professionals and activists put on the first ever transvestite and transsexual conference at University of Leeds. This literature, some of the earliest conference literature available on trans health, made clear distinctions between transvestites, that is the people who are dressed as opposite gender, and transsexuals, that is people who transition genders through surgery, and transgender people who did transition but did not elect to undergo surgery. In 1975, for the first time, protection for transgender people was codified into civil rights law. The city of Minneapolis was the first to do so by passing a non-discrimination ordinance preventing discrimination on the basis of having or projecting a self-image not associated with one's biological maleness or one's biological femaleness. Throughout the 1980s, artists like Bruce Laker, who also went by Fedra Kelly, had coined other terms like gender transient to refer to being transgender, which was still distinct from transsexual. By 1990s, the distinction between transgender and transsexual began to fade. According to Oxford English Dictionary lexicographer Jonathan Dent, this was around when wider LGBTQ plus community began to embrace trans as an umbrella term that would cover a wide range of identities that might not fit with traditional notions of gender similar to queer for sexuality. Let us now discuss at a very broad level about the transgender lives. The transgender community faces stigma and discrimination and therefore has fewer opportunities as compared to others. They are hardly educated as they are not accepted by the society and therefore do not receive proper schooling. Even if they are enrolled in educational institutions, they face harassment and are bullied every day and are asked to leave the school or they drop out on their own. It is because of this that they take up begging and sex work. Seldom does a skilled individual from this community get into formal employment due to the policy of hiring only from either the male or female gender, but this is slowly changing. Even if they do, they are ridiculed and ostracized and hence forced to leave their jobs. They are forced into sex work, which puts them at the highest risk of contracting HIV, as they agree to go ahead with unprotected sexual intercourse because they fear rejection or they want to affirm their gender through sex. They are viewed as vectors of HIV in the society. Other sexually transmitted infections such as rectal gonorrhea, syphilis, rectal chlamydia, etc. add to the risk of HIV. Transgender people bear the economic consequences also of discrimination, including high rates of poverty and unemployment, discrimination in education and homelessness. Trans people are more than twice as likely to live in extreme poverty. Safety and security of transgender people is a major concern. Their lives experience frightening levels of physical violence. This is particularly true among transgender people participating in sex work and other informal or criminalized economies. For instance, the brutal murders of transgender women occur with such alarming regularity, often with little response from law enforcement, that the American Medical Association declared violence against transgender people an epidemic in 2019. Recognition and respect for the civil rights of trans people is critically important because their legal needs span many aspects of life. These needs include identity documents that accurately reflect who they are, protections from employment discrimination and immigration rights, to name only a few. Basic rights of the transgender which are being violated and which needs to be restored. The social stigma that transgender person faces impacts their education and learning. They develop a feeling of being avoided, ignored and disgraced. The Transgender Persons Protection of Rights Act 2019 provides that the educational institutions that are funded or recognized by the government shall provide education, recreational facilities and sports for transgender persons without discrimination. This is with specific reference to India. The transgender persons have suffered workplace discrimination and discrimination in the matters of employment. They suffer discrimination mainly in the form of privacy violation, refusal to hire and harassment which leads to unemployment and poverty. To prevent the discrimination suffered by them, the Transgender Person Protection Act states that no government or even the private entities can discriminate against transgender person in the matters of employment, which includes recruitment and promotions, and every establishment should designate a person to be a complaint officer to deal with complaints in relation to the act. For instance, in case of Nangai versus the Superintendent of Police, the petitioner in the present case had applied for post of a woman police constable. The Tamil Nadu Uniformed Services Recruitment Board, Chennai, conducted the application test. The petitioner's application was successful and she received an order of appointment from the Superintendent of Police at Karur district. During the course of her training at the police recruit school in Vellore, she underwent a medical examination. The examination declared that she was transgender on the basis of chromosomal pattern and genitalia. The result of the medical examination contradicted her birth certificate, medical records and educational certificates. Later, the superintendent ordered her termination from the post of women constable. The Honorable High Court upheld that the petitioner has liberty to choose a different gender identity as a third gender in future based on the medical declaration, and questioned the order of termination from service issued by the Superintendent of Police, and was set aside by the Honorable Court to protect her right as a transgender person. The healthcare services for the transgender person does only refers to the medical procedure involved in transition, but overall state of complete physical, mental and social well-being. Healthcare also refers to a range of primary and other healthcare services which includes employment, housing and public acceptance of the transgender people. The transgender persons have suffered from substantial health disparities and barrier to appropriate health care. They suffer depression, have attempted suicides, violence and harassment and even the HIV. The human rights violation of transgender community is very serious. Being different from the other gender, transgender people have been subjected to social oppression as society does accept their gender identity, and they suffer from the physical violence which is inflicted upon them. They suffer from lack of education, unemployment, homelessness, lack of healthcare facilities, depression, alcohol, abuse and discrimination throughout their life. This situation is a clear reflection of the lives of transgender community not only in India but elsewhere, but the situation seems to be changing. Friends, let us now discuss some of the important Indian legislations and constitutional provisions for transgenders. Several initiatives to improve the lives of the transgender persons has been taken up at national and international level. The Honorable Supreme Court of India, in its pioneering judgment by the Division Bench of Justice K.S. Radhakrishnan and A.K. Sikri in National Legal Services Authority versus Union of India and others, recognized the third gender along with male and female. By recognizing diverse gender identities, the Honorable Court has busted the dual gender structure of man and woman which is recognized by the society. Recognition of transgenders as a third gender is not a social or medical issue but a human rights issue, according to Honorable Justice K.S. Radhakrishnan, who told the Supreme Court while handing down the ruling. The Honorable Supreme Court has given certain directions for the protection of the rights of the transgender persons by including of a third category in documents like the election card, passport, driving license, ration card, and for admission into educational institutions, hospitals, among others. Human rights are basic rights and freedoms which are guaranteed to a human by virtue of a person being a human, which can neither be created nor can be abrogated by any government. It includes the right to life, liberty, equality, dignity and freedom of thought and expression. The Honorable Supreme Court in National Legal Service Authority versus the Union of India was concerned with the grievances and sufferings of the transgender community. They sought a legal declaration of their gender identity rather than the identity of a male or female that was assigned at the time of their birth. Their grievance was that non-recognition of their gender identity is a violation of Article 14 and Article 21 of the Indian Constitution. The Honorable Court interpreted the meaning of Article 14 and held that article provides protection to any person, and person here includes transgender person as well. Hence, they are all entitled to legal protection of law in all the spheres of state activity like any other citizen of this country. The court also held that Article 15 and Article 16 is not just limited to biological sex of male or female, but it intended to include those people too who consider themselves to be neither male nor female. Further, the court referred to Article 19 clause 1a and 19 clause 2 and concluded that transgender personality can be expressed by transgender's behavior and presentation, and it cannot be restricted or prohibited. The court referred to Article 21 and held that hijras or eunuchs have to be considered as third gender for the purpose of safeguarding their rights under Part 3 of Constitution of India and the laws made by the Parliament and state legislatures. The preamble to the Constitution mandates every citizen justice, which can be social, economic, political equality of status. The Indian state policy that earlier recognized only two sexes, that is only male and female, has deprived the third gender from their several rights as being an Indian citizens, which includes right to vote, the right to own property, the right to marry, the right to claim a formal identity through a passport, etc., and more significantly their right to education, employment, health and so on. The basic rights which they were deprived from are their fundamental rights under Article 14, 15, 16 and 21. The rights of transgenders were for the first time considered under 2014 National Legal Services Authority NALSA judgment, where the Honorable Supreme Court laid emphasis on protecting and safeguarding the rights of the transgender person under the principles of Indian Constitution laid down in the Article 14, 15, 16 and 21. Article 14, 15 and 16 provides for right to equality, and Article 21 which provides right to freedom for each and every Indian citizen, but transgender persons were deprived from their basic right to freedom and equality. Article 14 deals with equality before the law or equal protection before the law within the territory of India, and it clearly falls within the expression person, which includes male, female and third gender within its ambit. So, the transgender is also entitled to legal protection under the Indian Constitution in all the spheres of state activity. Article 15, which deals with prohibition of discrimination on the ground of religion, race, caste and sex, includes the third gender under its ambit as being the citizens. They have the right to not to be discriminated on the ground of their religion, caste, race and sex. They have the right to protect their gender expression, which is majorly reflected through their dresses, action and behavior. Article 16 deals with equality of opportunity in the matters of public employment, as this article is used to broaden the concept of sex, which includes psychological sex and gender identity within its ambit. The transgender, being the citizens of India, has the right to employment and equal opportunity in the matters of employment, and they should not be discriminated on the basis of their sexual orientation. Article 21, which deals with the protection of life and personal liberty, states that no person shall be deprived of his life and personal liberty except according to the procedure of law. For ages, transgender have been deprived of their life and personal liberty. The transgender, being a citizen of India, should have full right to protect their right and personal liberty. The Honorable Supreme Court has also recognized the right to dignity by recognizing gender identity within the ambit of Article 21. Friends, let us now talk about decriminalization of section 377. The case Navtej Singh Johar versus the Union of India deals with decriminalization of section 377 of Indian Penal Code, as the central issue of the case was constitutional validity of section 377, as it stated that voluntarily carnal intercourse against the order of nature with any man, woman or animal shall be punished with the imprisonment for life or with imprisonment which may extend to 10 years with a fine. The petition was filed stating that section 377 of the Indian Penal Code is in violation of right to privacy, equality, freedom of expression and protection against discrimination. The petitioner in the present case filed a writ petition to seek the recognition of right to sexuality, right to sexual autonomy and right to choose a sexual partner to be a part of right to which is guaranteed under Article 21 of Constitution of India. It was argued that section 377 was violative of Article 14. Section 377 was further violative of Article 15, as it discriminates on the basis of the sex of a person's sexual partner, and it was further violative of Article 19, as it denied the right to express one's sexual identity. With regard to Immoral Traffic Prevention Act of 1956, which was amended in 1986, has become a gender neutral legislation. The domain of the act now applies to both male and female sex workers, along with those whose gender identity was indeterminate. With the amendment, both the male and hijra sex workers became criminal subjects, as this gives the police the legal basis for arrest and intimidation of the transgender sex workers. There is also Rights of Transgender Bill 2014. The bill was introduced in Rajya Sabha on 12th December 2014, which was passed on 24th April 2015 unanimously with cross-party support. This was a private member's bill introduced by the MP from Tamil Nadu, Shri Tiruchi Shiva, and 24th April is celebrated as Transgender Day following the passage of the bill in Rajya Sabha. The rights guaranteed under the bill are mostly substantive rights, such as the right to equality and non-discrimination, life and personal liberty, free speech, to live in a community, integrity along with protection from torture or cruelty and abuse, violence and exploitation. There is a separate clause for transgender children. Education, employment and social security and health are also covered under the bill. The chapter on education makes it mandatory for the government to provide inclusive education for transgender students and provide adult education to them. With the employment chapter, there are two separate clauses dealing with formulation of schemes for vocational training and self-employment of transgender persons by the government. There is a separate clause for non-discrimination against transgender persons in any establishment, public or private. In the Social Security and Health chapter, the government is asked to propagate social security and healthcare facilities which are to be provided in the form of separate HIV clinics and free SRS. They should be given the right to leisure, culture and recreation. Basic rights like access to safe drinking water and sanitation must be provided by the government. The bill envisages setting up a number of authorities and forums, national and state commissions for transgender persons. The commission's work will be mostly in the nature of inquiry or recommendations in inconsistencies in the application of the law or violations of right of transgender persons. The commissions can issue summons to witnesses, receive evidences, etc. There is penalty by way of imprisonment for up to a year for hate speech against transgender people. To provide protection and support to lead a happy life, the Transgender Person Protection of Rights Act 2019 was enacted. It states that government should take proper steps to provide healthcare facilities to transgender person, and it should include separate HIV surveillance centers and sex reassignment surgeries, and transgender person should be provided with a comprehensive medical insurance. Several suggestions also have been made by Honorable Supreme Court of India. The court has suggested directions to central and state governments, which includes Hijidas eunuchs should be treated as third gender for the purpose of safeguarding their fundamental rights. Recognize the person's need to identify one's own gender. Providing reservations in public education and employment as socially and educationally backward class of citizens. Making special provisions regarding HIV serosurveillance for transgender persons and provide appropriate health facilities. The court also mandates to tackle their problems such as fear, gender dysphoria, shame, depression, suicidal tendencies, etc. Measures should be taken to provide health care to transgender people in hospitals, such as making separate wards and also provide them separate public toilets. Frame social welfare schemes for their all-round development, to create public awareness so that the transgenders feel that they are part of the society and are not to be treated as untouchables. One of the basic tenets of equality scheme lies in the recognition and acknowledgement of the right of choice and self-determination. Determination of the gender to which a person belongs and relates is intrinsic to their right of self-determination and their dignity. International efforts. In 2019, the World Health Assembly adopted the 11th revision of the International Classification of Diseases ICD-11, which removed trans-related categories from the chapter on mental and behavioral disorders. Argentina broke ground in 2012 with a law that is considered the gold standard for legal gender recognition. Anyone over the age of 18 years can choose their gender identity, undergo gender reassignment and revise official documents without any prior judicial or medical approval, and children can do so with the consent of their legal representatives or through summary proceedings before a judge. In the subsequent 3 years, 4 more countries, Colombia, Denmark, Ireland and Malta, explicitly eliminated significant barriers to legal gender recognition. Then Nepal's Supreme Court, in a sweeping 2007 ruling, ordered the government to recognize a third gender category based on an individual's self-feeling. The ruling rested largely on the freshly minted Yogyakarta Principles, the first document to codify international principles on sexual orientation, gender identity and human rights. Similarly, in 2009, the Supreme Court in Pakistan called for a third gender category to be recognized and in Bangladesh the cabinet issued a 2013 decree recognizing hijras as their own legal gender. New Zealand and Australia now offer the option to have a gender listed as unspecified on official documents, while the Dutch Parliament has begun considering whether the government should record a person's gender on official identification documents at all. The right to recognition as a person before the law is guaranteed in numerous human rights treaties all over the world and is a fundamental aspect of affirming the dignity and worth of each person. However, in countries that allow for people to be recognized in the gender with which they identify, the requisite procedures may subject applicants to humiliating and harmful treatment also. The United Nations also has suggested several action points to facilitate the dignity of the transgender. It says about adopting comprehensive anti-discrimination laws and policies that prohibit discrimination based on gender identity and gender expression, including in employment, education, health care, housing, access to bathrooms and public services. It says to repeal laws used to arrest, detain or harass trans people based on their gender identity or expression, include gender identity and expression as protected characteristics in hate crime and hate speech laws. Legally recognize the gender identity of trans people in official documents through a simple administrative process based on self-identification without abusive requirements such as forced medical diagnosis, sterilization, treatment or divorce. UN also mentions to ensure effective recording, reporting, investigation and prosecution of acts of violence and torture against trans people and remedy for victims. It says to ensure access to health services including gender affirming procedures for trans people without stigma, discrimination or abusive requirements. The action point also talks about reforming international and national medical classifications that treat being trans as an illness, protecting transgender and non-conforming children and youth from violence and discrimination, and allowing for recognition of their gender identity. It also talks about training police officers, healthcare workers, teachers, judges, prison officials, immigration officers and other officials on respect and equal treatment of trans people. It says to ensure that trans people and organizations are consulted and participate when developing research legislation and policies that impact on their rights. United Nations also mentions about taking specific measures to respect the gender identity of trans people in detention and protect them from violence and discrimination. With regard to media, United Nations clearly mentions to include the voices of trans people in newspapers, television and radio, featuring trans people and their rights concerns in an objective, balanced and non-discriminatory manner. Do not propagate negative and harmful stereotypes about trans people. UN also tries to mention to refer to people using their preferred terms, pronouns, genders and names, and not to refer to or reveal that a person is a trans without their consent, and also the significant training to journalists on respect for trans people. Friends, let us now summarize this lesson. Transgender persons have suffered discrimination for ages, as earlier their gender identity was not recognized either in eyes of law or by the society, and they were forced to write male or female against their gender. The Honorable Supreme Court of India recognized transgender as the third gender to eradicate the discrimination suffered by them and to safeguard their rights. Efforts are being made at national and international level to provide all the welfare and protective measures to enable a life of dignity. Moreover, the acceptance and approval of gay and lesbian marriages in different parts of the world, whether legally or socially, even this gives us a ray of hope towards a better dignity to the transgender community. Thank you.